Thayer with the Coalition Against the NATO G8 War and Poverty Agenda, as well as a number of other organizations. And last Tuesday, which was the first day legally we could do it, we applied for permits to march from Daly Plaza down to the site of the NATO G8 summits, which is McCormick Place, for 12 noon Saturday, May 19th. And basically, we're going in the face of a prevailing wind from the 5th floor of the City Hall, the mayor's office, which is basically saying we hate protesters and we're going to do everything we can to prevent them from protesting against NATO G8. And that's just abominable. I mean, this mayor has really shown his true thuggish colors, I believe. And he's got a reputation for belligerence and lack of congeniality, shall we say, towards people he doesn't like, and unfortunately this is just more of the same. And the outrageous thing about this is that we already have a police force which has got a world-class reputation for violence, for violations of civil rights and liberties, and basically Rahm's remarks and his chief of police, Gary McCarthy's remarks, are really aimed at ginning up that kind of hostility towards protesters, which Chicago police are already quite notorious for. Anyway, we applied for the permit last Tuesday. According to the current ordinance, the city is required to respond to us by tomorrow, or we get exactly what we applied for. We fully expect the city to reject us. We fully expect the city to offer a really lousy alternative. According to the current ordinance, they're required to offer a quote-unquote comparable alternative, but we doubt it'll be anything but that. And so, at the end of the day, we'll probably end up in federal court over all of this. Ironically enough, the city is facing a mass trial on, I believe it's beginning the end of this month, regarding the mass arrests that occurred at the start of the Iraq War back in 2003. A war that, when he was congressman, our own Mayor 1% enthusiastically supported with war funding, even though it was very clear before it started, let alone after it started, that it was a war built on lies. It was a war of empire. And so we expect nothing but hostility from this administration in terms of our desires to protest against NATO and G8. It should be noted why we want to protest against NATO G8, because we're going to have an assemblage of the biggest banksters and warmongers on the planet right here in Chicago in May this year. These people believe, between them, I believe, control some 70% of world military funding. This in a world where more than half the population lives on less than $2 a day. And these are the people responsible for building the bombs, building the cluster bombs, building the nuclear weaponry, etc., and not deploying those resources to people who really need just the basics. I mean, a roof over their head. I mean, we live in a country that, of course, has no free higher education, no free health care, any number of guaranteed housing. These are the sort of things that are very typical in much poorer countries around the world. And yet, the feds are going to shell out some $55 million for starters, just for so-called security for these confabs they're having in May, rather than spending that on schools, keeping libraries open, etc. So people got a lot to protest for come May 2012. And our Mayor 1% is doing the best he can to make it difficult for people to do so. Your listeners may be aware of his proposed ordinances that are coming up for a vote next Wednesday, January 18th. Paris City Council committee meetings on the 17th. We're urging everyone to flood all 3 of those meetings to call their aldermen and so forth, because the draconian set of ordinances being proposed by Mayor 1% include things like increasing the minimum fine for breaking the parade permit law by some 20 times. It's going to zoom from $50 to $1,000 for minimum fine for violation. The maximum fine is going to double from $1,000 to $2,000 and will include the threat of also 10 days jail. The current ordinance also has that threatened jail time, I should note. But more seriously than just the fines is the specific provisions of this new ordinance. It's going to codify the notion that any large assemblage, all these people here, 10 to 1, none of them has got a permit, they could all be arrested. Every single General Assembly of Occupy Chicago could be arrested and subject to $2,000 fine and 10 days in jail. Now, OC, of which I'm a participant, we have General Assemblies 4 times a week. Every single one of those assemblies would be required to get a permit under the new ordinance. And so this is an attack not just on anti-NATO G8 protesters, these new ordinances. They're also an attack on everyone that's got a beef with City Hall, everyone who's got a beef with a private employer. You want to have a picket in a loop, you're subject to arrest for exercising your First Amendment rights. And so, fortunately, we think that Mayor 1% may have overreached with this really a full-scale attack on people's right to assemble. I mean, we're hearing people are really, you know, banging on the doors of their aldermen and women, and so it's different.
Okay, we were talking briefly about the mass arrests back in '03, the original peace demonstration that resulted in mass arrests. How many people were arrested?
Over 850 people were arrested. All the charges were dropped in manner indicative of the innocence of the arrested, including myself. Over 500 of us were taken to various police stations, all the women taken to the far west side, all the men to the far south side. And the interesting thing about this is that this was the single largest mass arrest in Chicago history. Yeah, all the charges were dropped. No one was charged with any violence. We've got videotape of police officers wailing with their billy clubs, wading into the crowd and clubbing. It's a miracle no one was really seriously hurt, let alone killed, by this illegal police action. Of course, no disciplinary measures taken against the police for that, even though we have them on videotape clubbing people with their billy clubs at full force. And that's a legacy that the city has to live down. We're not just talking Chicago 68. We're talking the millions of dollars each year that the city doles out in successful civil suits against it. Basically, citizens sitting in judgment of their peers as well as police officers, and deciding that the police officers routinely violate people's rights.
And since this time, you've actually organized dozens of other protests.
Yes.
I've actually documented at least half a dozen and that sort of thing. None of them have ever resulted in arrests for any violence.
That's right. That's right. Though the police have routinely dinged us with violations of the current permit ordinance, they've used it as a tool of harassment against myself and other organizers, and every single time we go out, it's become like a cost of doing business, which is ridiculous, that people should not pay a First Amendment tax, which is what the city has used the current permit ordinance. The new permit ordinance that they're trying to ram down people's throats, as I was saying earlier, the penalties would be dramatically increased. The opportunities for the city to ding you with violations have dramatically increased. I mean, just a few examples besides the ones I cited earlier. Organizers would be required a week in advance to tell the police, tell the commissioner of the Department of Transportation a week in advance about every banner or quote-unquote attention-getting device that was being brought to the protest. How can we predict that sort of thing a week in advance? You would have to tell the commissioner also the contingents that would be participating, and
no, it's just in case of an emergency, then people won't get trampled. All right, let's start moving, guys. Where do you want to go, sir? Where do you want to go? No, nothing. Where do you want to go? I'm asking you a question.
I'd like to see the president.
I'd like to stand on a public stage.
I'd like to see my president.
Gotta go.
Standing on
Let's go.
Just standing on a street corner.
We're not standing.
You can, not right now.
But, sir, I can understand if it's a Secret Service order or something.
I understand.
For the president.
Correct?
Okay.
Say yes. The report, you're going to say yes.
All right.
I'm giving your direction, not to stand.
Well, no, I'm just waiting to get through. I'm just waiting to get through, officer. Okay. Okay. And we're sorry. You know.
Hey, this officer can't.
No, he was talking to me for a moment. That's all.
Give me a break.
Andy would know better. He's been arrested more than anybody.
I just want to stand still at Jackson and LaSalle on the sidewalk. We can stand still anywhere on the sidewalk.
Okay, we're back. Yeah.
The egos.
All right. So, what just happened here?
Once again, you have police hostility to protesters, and they throw their weight around. And this is why the new ordinances that Rahm wants to put in are odious, because it gives jackass police officers like these guys that much more license to push people around and ding them with ridiculous fines and so on.
On public property.
On public property, on a public way that we pay for.
Well, let me just say that jackass was your term. That's all right.